This is part one of our White Barn class from our class archives. The tracer workbook that includes full-size tracers for 2 sizes, the color mix worksheet, and the reference photos are available in the full class on Patreon. If you'd like to continue watching this class, make sure that you check out the links that I have below in the description, along with the wood cutout links that are available to you so that you can paint this pretty piece too. If you love this video, I hope that you'll subscribe. Leave me a comment too. I really try very hard to respond to all of the comments, and I love hearing from you. Enjoy the class. Welcome to part one of White Barn. This is an amazing class that I am representing on my site. You can see the finished piece behind me. It's big. My piece that I did is a 30 by 24. In all of the class stuff that I will be loading for you, you'll get the tracer both for the super big one, um, and I think the other one is 16 by 20. Can't remember now. But there's 2 sizes, and the same at the website. There are 2 sizes available in the wood cutouts. And as we go forward, I'll pick the beast up and turn it so that you can see, really all of the dimension and just how pretty that piece is. So let's dive in and get started. The very first thing that we're going to do is talk about um, the substrate and how I went about getting it ready for us. Before I get too far, let me just check the audio just to make sure, because I've been having trouble today. So I made my big substrate. I make all of my substrates in my workshop. So like I said, this is a 24 by 30 that I'm working on. I have all of the wood cutouts set on my piece so that I can do a little bit of tracing. What I really want to know at this point is where those dark window shapes are. So what I have done at this point is I've cleaned all of the edges of my wood cutouts, and I have sealed the backer board, my main substrate, and all of the wood pieces with GAC 100. So I just paint it on and just make sure that I have a good coat of it. The GAC 100 acts as a sealer, and it keeps the paint from soaking in. It also keeps any oils or anything from the wood to soak up through your paint. So it's just a nice barrier seal between your paint and your wood. So let's go ahead and play the video. As I said before, I'm just going to be using a pencil to trace out those shapes. I just want to make sure those areas are nice and dark. If you're not using the wood cutouts, I would skip that step completely. Just go on to painting your background. And then once your background is in, then you can trace in the shapes. Like I said, the GAC 100 is covering all of those pieces already, and I've let it dry. So if you are not using the wood cutouts, I would, like I said, I would do the background first, just like I'm doing here. Then I would trace on the barn and paint it. And then I would trace on the flowers on top of that. So you saw me there just hold up my container of open medium. I really like that Duraban Matisse or Daraban Matisse open medium. Any thick open medium would work. Winsor & Newton has a nice gel medium that you could use. but I'm just using a big cheap brush and I'm just coating the surface, particularly at this point where the sky is. I'm just coating that surface with the open medium. All right, I'm gonna grab a note here so I can start to make a list for myself of the things I want to be sure to put in the class for all of you. So I'm just putting down a nice thin coat of this. The reason for just adding the open medium is that since it's such a big space, I'm going to I'll have more time to blend in my sky and work with those colors. So y- you do, it'll take more time to dry when you do that, but I like having a little bit more working time. So, you know, be aware that you may have a little bit of a longer drawing time for your sky if you use something like this. I love this cheap, the set of cheap large brushes that I have. I'll, I just made a note to remember to put those in our Facebook group. It's just going to get out my color mix sheet so I can make sure that I'm telling you guys the right color as I go along here. The barn that I'm painting or the scene that I'm painting here, I really am looking for a very pastel spring background. So the colors I'm using are cobalt blue hue, titanium white, and I added a little bit of quin magenta just to tone down the blue just a little bit. If you don't have cobalt blue, you can certainly use any of the blues that you have. Probably a phthalo blue would be a good choice. Um, but again, you can use the red to tone it down a little bit. So I'm being kind of streaky with the colors, doing some crisscross motions, um, letting the color vary a little bit. It's a big substrate, and I'm not used to working on such a big substrate. So I continually have to mix paint, but that's okay. Um, like I said, I've got that open medium down, and so I'm gonna have plenty of time. You see me dipping into the little cup over to the right. That is another extender. That's a thinner extender, fluid extender. So I'm using that more um, as a medium to get my paint to flow across more than keep it wet because I already have the open medium down. I am varying the blues as I go through. I like to let the blue get a little bit darker up in the corners, but mostly I'm just looking for a real soft sky with a little bit of color variation. I'm going to go forward just slowly so you can kind of see this come together. I've left some of the areas in the center where I traced out those windows. I just want to make sure that I get the sky color far enough in that I'm sure that my wood cutouts are going to show through. Like I said, for you, if you're not using the wood cutouts, I would just paint the whole thing, just paint the whole background in. I needed to put out a little bit more white. You can see me mixing it over there. All of the palette colors that I use, I add open medium to make them stay nicer on my palette. So that was what that mixing was. It's kind of fun to work with the great big brushes sometimes. We get used to working on some smaller pieces and then we get this great big brush in our hand and like, wow, a whole new world. So I'm not really painting clouds, but you can see that just a little bit of a lighter stroke in there kind of gives the feel of some little fluffy things happening. I had to pick up a little glob of paint. I'm going to go forward just slowly again. You can see that I didn't prime my background at all. I just used the GAC 100 that I talked about before. You certainly could prime the background and just have a white background. I didn't think that I needed it. So I'm going to start mixing up a little bit of the green that I'm going to use to start to lay in the foreground. For the green, I used Titan Buff, Cad Yellow, um, Titanium White, and little bits of burnt sienna. And then add in a little bit of that cobalt blue for the green um, color that we're going for. And I want this, again, I want it to be very soft. So I'm going to start out being um, pretty careful that I have a real pastel kind of green back there. Um, and I think that that's where the Titan Buff comes in really nice. It just does such a great job of mixing some real pastel colors. If you don't have Titan Buff, you could certainly mix a little bit of burnt umber into titanium white just to get a little bit of an off-white color. And then you mix in your yellow and blue for the greens. There's the burnt sienna that I was talking about. There's just a hint of the burnt sienna, just barely, but I think it's a nice addition to this color. I'm using a big filbert here. You could still, and probably I should still be using the big brush that I used on the sky. I always say use the biggest brush you can, and then sometimes we get ourselves into the situation where we're like, oh, I've got this brush dirty, so I'm just gonna keep going. So I know as I paint in this foreground that much of the bottom of this substrate is going to be covered by my wood cutouts. If you are not using the wood cutouts, the same will be true for you as you um, trace on your flowers later. But I think it's still helpful just to go ahead and get a layer of paint down because everything that we do on top of it is going to it's going to go faster and better with that layer of paint. But also with the wood cutouts, it's nice to have that raw wood color covered underneath. I'm going to go forward a little bit. You can see that I'm really varying the color, adding in more of the Titan Buff in places, letting it get darker in places. I know I want it to be quite a bit darker down at the bottom, but I can always adjust that as I go forward. My main focus here is I don't want it to get too dark. I want it to stay very soft, kind of the pretty spring colors. If you're going to do different colors for your flowers and if you want yours to have more of a summery feel, then you might choose to go with um, even brighter blue sky colors and brighter green grass colors. So there's certainly lots of variations, lots of things that you can do. I am letting it, I did change to a bigger brush there. I am letting it get a little bit darker at the very horizon line of this foreground area. I know I'm going to put some trees in there, so I'm letting it get a little bit darker, but not much. And I hope that you can see how much variation is in the coloring here. Try not to let it be just one flat color. As I start to darken up the bottom down here, you'll see that I start to take, oops, adjust the camera. It's hard to fit this thing in. It is just so big. I'll start to do some vertical strokes to kind of indicate some grasses and things happening back there. I don't have to be very specific about that because much of it's going to be covered, but sometimes adding in a little bit of detail like that just helps me as I'm going forward. A reminder to me that I can have some of those shapes happening back behind the wood cutouts. So you can see it. Sometimes I put the brush on the edge and do some just loose up and down strokes. If you have your tracer out at this point, it's a nice help for you to be able to see where the wood cutouts are going to kind of be, or where your flowers will be when you get to that point. Once I put in some of those up and down strokes, I can just lightly go over them, settle them into the background color a little bit. Fast forward a little. None of this has to be perfect at this stage. It's just, um, just again, that first layer of color. So now I've set all the wood cutouts in, and I'm going to start to paint in the distant trees. So for the distant trees, I'm using that same green color that I had before. So Titan Buff, Cad Yellow, Titanium White, a little bit of Burnt Sienna, some of the Cobalt Blue. And I want these to be very, very faint, almost like you can't see them. You can just barely see that there's something back there. And so a way for us in our pieces to give the feeling of distance is to make those trees more atmospheric, or have them contain more of the colors of the atmosphere. So you'll see me adding a little bit of that sky color into these. And I'm just using a filbert brush and just tapping in some very, very, very loose tree shapes. I don't want to I don't want to fill it in. I just want to tap some really distant tree tops in back here. In this video, what you can see across the top of the canvas is a shadow from my cameras. So just so that you know that that's not painted in that way. So I hope that you can see just how faint these are. On my palette to the right, you can see that I've put in some of that blue that I was talking about before. just go slow, just have fun with this part. I'm going to slowly go forward. I'm going to have a little bit of the tree showing back on the right side of that silo, and then some trees coming off this side. Again, use your tracer to get an idea. The important thing is that we want to vary these heights. We don't want to have them be just straight across. So be building up the variation right away. Now, as I come down, I'm letting it get just a little bit darker, as if these trees now are just a little bit closer to us. It's really, really fun to play with those layers of distance. I really had a good time with that in this piece. I can use my finger in between some of those to just sort of blend in some of the brush strokes if I felt like they were just a little bit too strong. So that's the other thing about distance. As things get farther away from us, they have less detail. So we can again um, give the viewer an idea of distance by adding a little bit more detail to the items that are closer to us. Higgins, no. Higgins, no. I'm letting my brush turn using kind of a rounding stroke back there. I'm letting it build up some texture. Um, Texture isn't the right word. I'm letting it build up some variation. In other words, I'm not completely filling in any area solidly with paint. And you can see that every time I go back to my palette, I'm mixing just a little bit of a different color. I love doing that. I love just every time I take my brush back, just adjusting a little bit. And those small little adjustments that you make, you'll have much more success than if you came in and tried to make a color that was a lot different. Just just tweak it just a little bit at a time. I'm doing some horizontal strokes at the base of those trees to give the feel of ground back there. The horizontal strokes will help build that feeling of the transition between the texture of the trees and the ground below them. I decided to play with the palette knife a little bit, and I really love how that worked. The nice thing about the palette knife is that we can get some more random shapes, more random marks in our paint. than we can sometimes get with, well, than we can ever really get with our paintbrush. It helps us be loose. So I mixed up a little bit of color and then loading a little bit of color on the back of my knife, I can start pressing in some of that color. Sometimes I'll press a little bit harder with the tip of the knife to press the paint in more and spread it around. Other times I'll hold it more loosely and let the paint skip across. So just experiment with the pressure and the way you want to hold your knife. Try different things. Sometimes use more the side of your knife. Other times that this particular knife has a nice rounded tip to it, so that helps with building some of those rounded treetop shapes. I'll come in and load just a little bit of paint on the edge of that brush and then bring it up and press it in to build some of those shapes. And if you ever feel like you've used the palette knife and you didn't like the mark that it left, just take a clean brush and tap the clean brush along it um, to settle it down. I added a little bit more of the burnt sienna, a little bit of the I think I added a little bit of the titanium white there. It might have been the Titan buff. But then as I take that new color up, I'm assessing whether or not that I like that color. And if I don't, then I'll go back and mix something that's a little bit different. This was just fun. I hope that you'll, if you've never done any painting with a palette knife, this is a great um, kind of intro to that because you know it's so subtle back there. We're not trying to make big dramatic effects like if you were painting a wave or something like that where you want big dramatic palette knife strokes. These are kind of subtle and just a really great way to start playing with a palette knife and seeing what you can do. Giving the hint of just a little bit of darker areas within those trees. And I didn't like that one at all. So you can see me take the paper towel in and um, just wipe it away, just wipe it out. I think that it was the brown there that I wasn't liking. So you know, we can fix anything. It doesn't, we don't have to be worried that we're going to make a mistake. I use a palette knife quite a bit on this piece. I also use a palette knife on the barn painting and um, yeah, it had been a while since I'd used a palette knife and I really enjoyed it. If you don't have a palette knife or you just prefer not to do this, of course you can do the same thing with a paintbrush. You can actually use a paintbrush in very much the same way that you would use a palette knife, just by holding the brush more horizontal along the surface. And I'll show that again in a little bit. I'll show that with a little bit more detail. So I'm just using a brush just to soften some of that I just laid in. And you can keep playing with these as much as you want to. Add as much or as little detail back here as you like. but it really is fun to play with those different layers of trees and give that feel of kind of a misty, distant happening back there. And as always, remember, we don't have to have this perfect at this stage. We can get an idea of what we'd like back here. And then as we get in some of our other details in the front, we'll have a better idea of what these look like and if they need more. So when I'm painting, I would always rather do not enough and add more later than do too much at this stage, because it's just impossible to get the real feel for exactly how these will look without all the colors of the beautiful flowers in front of them and this all the textures that are going on in the barn. So just get it close. Um, just get something that allows you to start to see the scene building. So this is the same process over here, adding in different colors, making sure that there's variation, trying to make sure that I get all the way up against the silo. You could see me turn my palette knife there to get up against. I just don't, I didn't want to get partway through the painting and realize I'd left a big gap. So I came back in. At this point, I'm adding in some of the lights. That helps bring it all together too. I liked the hint of that little bit of yellow you can see on the right, where I just let it get a little bit yellower. It's kind of a fun little pop of color. So that is all for the first part of our white barn. In the next part, we will start to paint the barn. So if you are doing this without wood cutouts, this would be a great time to go ahead and trace in the barn shape and be ready for the next step. I'll see you in that class.